The Arizona Cardinals beat the Cincinnati Bengals by a score of 36-23 in their first preseason game. Let's go over my key takeaways from this game. Now let's get this out of the way. I understand that preseason games don't matter, that players can pop in the preseason and then do nothing in the regular season. You have to take everything with a grain of salt. So with that said, let's look at the things that stood out to me in this game. The first thing is that Dortch continues to impress. He looked good last preseason, he looked good in limited snaps during the regular season last year, and he's looking like he's making a major push to be on the 53-man roster as both a slot receiver and as the primary return man. Barring injury, I would be surprised if Dortch does not make the Week 1 roster. My next observation is that Victor Dimukeje is not only making a case for being part of that 53-man roster, he looks like he's making a push to get some significant playing time at edge rusher. Dimukeje had 2 sacks and an impressive PFF grade of 91.0 for the game. Going into this offseason, I thought Dimukeje might end up being the odd man out with the abundance of young pass rushers that this team has. But he's making a case to be one of those guys who's part of that rotation. 2020 undrafted free agent Jessie Lemon also had a good game with 1 sack and a PFF grade of 94.8. Now, I think Lemon is less likely to make the roster and is probably more of a practice squad player, but it was nice to see him play well. Now, the rookie edge rushers, Cameron Thomas and Myjai Sanders, didn't look quite as good as Dimukeje. Thomas in particular looked like a rookie and had a PFF grade of 51.8. Sanders had a better game with a PFF grade of 78.1, but he did seem to struggle with tackling at points. I still think both of these players will make the roster, and I'm optimistic about what their future holds. Now, cornerback was kind of a mixed bag. Marco Wilson struggled a lot. He had a PFF defensive grade of 43.0 and a coverage grade of 41.0. Again, against second stringers and practice squad players. But Breon Borders was a whole other level of bad in terms of his performance in this game. His PFF grades of 29.9 overall and 28.8 in coverage against third stringers and practice squad players was alarming. But sadly, based on what we saw from him during the season last year, it wasn't surprising. I'd be very surprised if Breon Borders makes this roster, and he seems to me to even be a question mark for the practice squad. Now, on the positive side, 2 cornerbacks stood out to me in a good way. Josh Jackson had a nice game, made a couple nice plays, but even more impressive was 7th round rookie Christian Matthew. Christian Matthew had an overall PFF grade of 81.4 and a coverage grade of 87.9. He made some really nice plays, and his length and athleticism were on full display this game. We need to see more from him, and he still needs to develop. Again, this was against second and third stringers, but it's looking like this 7th round pick out of Valdosta State University could be a diamond in the rough for the Cardinals. And in terms of pure athleticism, Matthews compares favorably with Richard Sherman. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be Richard Sherman or at that level, but in terms of the physical tools, that's the kind of player he is. In fact, he's even a little more athletic in some areas. There's more than those physical traits to playing cornerback, but he does have the tools to be a good NFL cornerback if he can develop those other traits. Before I go any further, do me a quick favor. Please click like on this video, and if you're a Cardinals fan, subscribe to my channel. I think you'll enjoy my videos. The offensive line had a solid game overall. Of the 9 offensive linemen who had more than 2 blocking snaps, 7 had PFF grades over 75. And new Cardinal Will Hernandez led the way with a PFF grade of 92.1. Of course, you would expect Hernandez to play well against backups, but the fact that he was dominant is a nice sign for the Cardinals' new right guard. My next observation is that both of the quarterbacks, Tracy Mcsorley and Guarantano, played well. Now, Mcsorley did nearly throw an interception in the end zone that was broken up by the tight end who was on the receiving end of that. But aside from that, he had a pretty solid game. I think Mcsorley is going to make the 53-man roster as that 3rd string quarterback and could be the 2nd string quarterback of the future for this team. Guarantano is most likely a practice squad player, but it was nice to see him perform as well as he did. Next, Isabella had a solid game. It wasn't spectacular, but he made some nice plays and looked competent out there. Now, I realize this is probably too late for Isabella's time with Arizona, but I do think he's going to find a home somewhere in the league when his time with Arizona is over. Whether they cut him this preseason or he plays out his rookie deal and signs somewhere else as a free agent next year. My next observation is that the running game overall was solid, but I didn't think any of the running backs necessarily had an exceptional game. Now, Jonathan Ward did make short work of 2 goal line carries for touchdowns, and Keontae Ingram did show some nice wiggle on a few plays, but Trace Mcsorley led the team with 32 rushing yards on 4 carries, and the only running back to average more than 4 yards per carry was TJ Pledger with 1 carry for 8 yards. The running backs were fine, but I just didn't see a lot of plays that stood out in terms of the running game. Now, in terms of stopping the run, the Cardinals actually did a pretty good job this game. The Cardinals limited the Bengals to 62 yards rushing on 2.2 yards per carry average. And there was also some nice play from some of the interior defensive linemen. Jonathan Ledbetter, Christian Ringo, Michael Dogby, and Rashard Lawrence all looked good. And they all had solid PFF grades to support that. In particular, Rashard Lawrence and Manny Jones had a couple nice tackles for loss in the backfield. Yes, I realize this is a preseason game, but with as much as the team struggled against the run last year, it was nice to see this performance. Finally, Zaven Collins. Now, I know he's taken a lot of heat from Cardinals fans this offseason, and I thought in this game, he was kind of invisible. He wasn't bad, but he didn't necessarily pop on film either. He had a respectable PFF grade of 71.9, and I do think there were some plays where he wasn't in a position to make a play because he was fulfilling his assignment elsewhere. But I would have liked to see at least a few plays where he popped on film against these second string and third string players. I'm not going to overreact to this, and I still think he has a talent to be a good linebacker in the NFL, but I definitely want to see more from him in the coming games. So what were your takeaways from the game? Who stood out to you? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on The Cardinal Rule.